You ever wondered what it would be like if Mega Man ditched his Buster and decided to give everybody a healthy dose of these hands instead? Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore because Gravity Circuit turned that into a reality. Gravity Circuit is a fast-paced, side-scrolling action platformer that takes a heavy amount of inspiration from Mega Man X, and it cleverly weaved in a good chunk of fighting game mechanics into its core gameplay. Gravity Circuit was developed by Domesticated Ant Games, and after doing a little bit of digging around to see if there was any more games they did in their library, I was quite surprised to find out that this is actually the first title they've ever released, which is impressive when you consider the sheer level of quality that was put into this one. Anyway, let's not delay this video any further and find out what the hype is all about. Firing up the game will treat you to a little cinematic that pretty much explains the main story. In a futuristic world populated by sentient robots, everything was peaceful until a group had dug up a strange ship known as the Ark. Shortly after this was unearthed, the city is suddenly under attack by a malicious force known as the Virus Army. Robo-civilization was doomed until 9 Guardians who was powered up by the circuit fought against the Virus Army and kept them in check. After the Virus Army was finally defeated, there was only one survivor among the group of heroes with his life hanging by a thread. Thankfully, he was rescued before he became scrap metal like the rest of his comrades. That remaining Guardian will later on be introduced as Kai, who is the main character we will be controlling throughout the game. At the very least, peace was restored until the Virus Army returned for some unknown reason. Kai had woke up from his stasis as if he was brought back to life due to his sense of justice and left to face off against the Virus Army, only to find out that the other Guardians are not only alive and kicking, but they have also joined their ranks. So now, Kai not only has to find out why the Virus Army has returned and stop them, he also has to take down his ex-comrades along the way. After viewing that cutscene, the game throws you right into the heat of the action, and for an intro stage, it wastes no time putting the player's reflexes to the test because unlike a lot of intro stages in games like these, this particular one has some level of bite to it. This is mostly because Gravity Circuit assumes that you went through that tutorial before you jump right into the actual game itself, which I'm going to say right now, you may want to do that before you even attempt to start a new game. Other than that, Kai has been blessed with solid controls as he's not only responsive to the player's input, but his overall movement is smooth yet snappy and very easy for the player to handle, which is a requirement for a game as fast paced as this. His buttons are pretty simple for the player to follow as he's given the standard stuff. He can jump, perform melee combos which will change based on the player's directional input, pretty much as if you're playing a platform fighter. He also has a chain rod which functions almost the same as Zero's weapon from Mega Man Zero 2, complete with some Spider Dude action. This chain rod can also be used to grab enemies if they are stunned, and certain projectiles are susceptible to being pulled out of the air so you can lob them right back at your foes. Also, I really get a kick out of the enemy's facial expressions when you stun them. I mean, I'd be crapping my pants too if homie grabbed my grenade and blasted me with it. Kai can also perform wall jumps and scale down these same walls exactly like the Maverick Hunters themselves. Additionally, if he happens to cling onto a cliff, he'll hang there for as long as the player needs him to. And of course, it should come to no surprise that he has a sliding ability along with a dash. But it should be noted that the dash is indefinite, meaning he will continue to sprint across a level until the player lets go of the dash button. Finally, Kai can also perform special moves anytime the player hits the special button. And just like in Smash, these special moves Kai performs will change depending on what techniques a player has equipped along with their directional input. I will be revisiting the topic of techniques later on. Now when you perform a special move, Kai will consume a resource called Burst Energy, which is mainly earned by defeating enemies who will drop small clusters of it. Anytime you fill this meter up to the maximum, Kai will store that energy for the player to use at any time, and it can be expanded upon so the player can contain more. After clearing the intro stage, you will be taken to the main base where you can talk to the locals, shop for upgrades, and this is where you'll also be able to select your stages. Now if you look at the stage select screen, this is pretty much what you can expect from a Mega Man inspired title. Gravity Circuit as a useful function when you're selecting your stage. If you look at the center of the screen when you're highlighting a map, the game will display the stage's threat level in the form of 2 stats, the map and the power level. The map will dictate how difficult the stage will be, meanwhile the power meter will inform players of the boss's strength. So when picking a stage, players will have to decide if it's wise to go for a boss that's weak but will need to overcome a monstrous stage to get to them, or stick with a stage that is easy while a tough opponent is eagerly waiting to pummel their face in once they've reached the end of their level. I really like this feature as it provides players with a clear direction on where they may want to start instead of accidentally picking one of the hardest levels as their first stage and providing a chunk of trial and error until the player finally discovers a stage that they should start with. Once you pick a level, you will be greeted with a small introduction of the boss, which is skippable if you don't want to see it all the time, even if it's your first time picking the stage. The game doesn't want to waste your time, and I can appreciate that. Now when you're playing through the stages themselves, each of these levels will follow a theme based on the boss that is waiting for you at the end. Cable, for example, is a circuit that uses electricity, so his stage is going to be filled with a lot of electric-based hazards and mechanics centered around that theme, and you can expect that for all the circuits you will be fighting against. The length of these levels are fairly decent, as they don't feel like they drag on for too long or too little. These stages also have several checkpoints along the way, so you don't need to worry about respawning at the beginning of the stage if you happen to bite the dust. These checkpoints can also refill both your life and your burst meter to full for a small sum of cash, but keep in mind that it will steadily increase the more times you use it. These stages won't instantly kill you either if you happen to land on a hazard like spikes or fall into a pit hole. You'll instead respawn on what is considered to be the closest safe zone, so you may try again at the expense of losing a portion of your health. This game also doesn't have a life counter either, so players are able to fail as many times as needed while overcoming the game's challenging nature. Don't get me wrong, this game will beat you senseless at times, but its forgiving nature balances out that difficulty by not having you start all the way at the beginning of the level. Each stage is also filled with 8 hostages that need to be rescued, along with a power-up that can extend your health or expand your burst energy. Recovering these hostages won't do anything for you at first, but if you were to visit the nurse back at the base, you'll learn that she will provide you with power-ups that Kai can equip, which will give him useful abilities like the double jump or slowly descending his fall if the player holds the jump button down. And putting these two power-ups together can invalidate some pretty tough platforming areas. Just keep in mind though that the only way you can get these power-ups is if you rescue enough hostages, because as she puts it, it gives the players the incentive to go out there and save them. Now that I think about it, this is X6's hostage system done right if you ask me. Once you've reached the end of the stage, you'll be greeted with a circuit who is occupying that area. After exchanging some dialogue, the two of you will duke it out shortly after. Now if you've played a Mega Man game before, you may feel right at home as these fights are pretty similar in regards to their overall flow, but to those who've never experienced these fights in the first place, they can be described as a deadly dance. These circuits will often move around a certain way before throwing out an attack of their own, and they will go out of their way to position themselves based on your movement. Get them down to about half health and they'll start using their desperation moves as a result. These are not one-time uses either, as they will make multiple attempts to hit you with these devastating attacks. Having these circuits change their attack patterns based on your positioning makes these battles feel more lively, as these bosses are real quick to punish you the moment you're caught slipping. Also, these circuits do not have a weakness system, so trying to cheese them won't do you any good. If you want to defeat them more effectively, you're going to need to experiment with different techniques to figure out what gets the job done, which adds a nice layer of depth to these battles and by extension the overall gameplay. Or you could be like me and suplex everybody just because you can. When you defeat a circuit, you don't get anything initially. You will need to visit the technique shop for that, which I will talk about now. Techniques are learned anytime you purchase them from the shop. The inventory will be small at first, but as you defeat more circuits, the list of options will continue to expand. The techniques the shop will acquire at the time is also based on the circuit you've defeated. So if you want to unlock the Tatsumaki and Zero's Masenko, you'll need to defeat Medley in order to unlock both of them. That's right, defeating a circuit unlocks 2 moves at a time, giving you a bit more to look forward to each time you clear a stage. With 4 different techniques you can equip at any time and many to pick from, combined with the impressive number of power-ups you can acquire from the nurse, the game gives you a lot of customization that can easily cater to anyone's playstyle. You can quite literally make a build that has Ryu's moveset from Street Fighter if you really want to, or go for a build that fits a certain theme, or maybe you want a moveset that lets you adapt to any situation. Kind of like my FYO platforming build, where all I did was stack every mobile technique and power up I had that synergizes with mobility, all for the sole purpose of invalidating platforming sections just because I can do it. Now when you are ready for some downtime, you can wander around the base and speak with the hostages you've rescued, which gives more insight on what life was like during the days when Kai was battling against the virus army alongside the other circuits at the time. These convos are meant to flesh out the story more, and they do add a nice layer of insight to these events, filling in those gaps where it is needed. Now when it comes to the game's art direction, it is very clear that Gravity Circuit went for more of an NES look, but if you ask me, I say the game feels more like a hybrid between the NES and the SNES. The sprites tend to use solid color palettes as you would see on an NES title, but there are also more details added to these sprites that make the visuals more refined, like different shading and fluid yet flashy animations, which allows the game to provide a more colorful yet impactful visuals as I'm fighting my way from one point of the stage to the next. This, provided with the sound effects you'll hear throughout the game, adds weight to the overall feel of the action the game is trying to go for. As for the game's soundtrack, I already knew from the jump that the music was going to be in good hands, hands, because Dominic Nidmark is responsible for the tunes you'll hear throughout this title. I was first introduced to him when I heard his work from games like Bot Vice, Blazing Chrome, and Strikely Sisters, just to name a few examples. He also has a hand in composing the music for a fan project called Mega Man X Corrupted, and if you hadn't heard of that project until now, I suggest you go check it out. But back to Gravity Circuit's music. This man did a fantastic job on its original soundtrack. All of the tunes you hear will match their respective themes that they're going for, making it feel like these are the theme songs for the circuits themselves. For example, when you look at someone like Medley, whose sole theme is centered around dance music, you can expect her theme to be more upbeat and have a certain bounce to it. Well, you'll be happy to know that it does. But then Dominic takes it a step further. If you don't skip any of the boss introductions when selecting a stage, you will hear the usual jingle that plays for all of them. But right before the jingle ends, it will actually play a small portion of that character's theme. This same thing also happens when you're fighting the circuits, as the boss music will weave a small portion of their theme as you're fighting them. I'm aware that these can be seen as small add-ons, but I really like that the composer did this. It makes everything feel more personalized towards that circuit, and this type of stuff matters in the overall experience. Now, what I'm about to say is something I try to reserve for only the best titles out there, and so far the last game that achieved this level of hype, from me at least, is Freedom Planet 2. I made a whole video as to why that game earned its flowers, which I do suggest you go and check it out. Gravity Circuit is easily up there as one of the greatest games I've ever played. Throughout my whole experience, I hardly found any flaws with this title and beat this game multiple times already, at least twice for my own entertainment and once more for the purpose of making this video. Each playthrough had me smiling from ear to ear, even during the challenging moments the game was throwing at me. The devs really knocked it out of the ballpark with this one. However, there is one thing I do have to mention if you are going to be playing this game on the Switch. Gravity Circuit for the most part runs smoothly, at least right up until you reach the final stretch of the game. Due to how intense the visuals become during this level, the Switch version is prone to experiencing some heavy slowdowns, which can screw with your platforming and fighting abilities immensely during a stage that is already designated to be extremely difficult to begin with. Now, this only happens when it's undocked, as the problems fix themselves immediately the moment I docked my Switch and started playing off of my TV instead. So Switch owners at the very least have a way to alleviate the issue. Meanwhile, this problem does not exist on PC or PlayStation systems at all. What I really love about Gravity Circuit is that this is a game that is inspired by Mega Man X and captures the spirit of these games to a T while maintaining its own self-identity. While there are other indie titles I've played that are Mega Man inspired, like Shovel Knight, Panzer Paladin, and the more recent Batboy, these play more like the classic series. Meanwhile, Gravity Circuit leans heavily into the X series, which is something we do not see very often. I do hope that the devs over at Domesticated Ant Games plans to make another entry in the future, as they have a really solid title on their hands. Meanwhile, if you are into the Mega Man X titles as much as I am, or if you're just looking for a solid action platformer, this game is too good to pass up. Anyway, that's all I have for today. If you liked the video, feel free to hit me with that siggity sub if you're new, and I hope I get to see y'all in the next one. Peace!